Okay, well, welcome everybody to this seminar organized by the Center for Comparative and Public Law and also the Human Rights Hub at Hong Kong U. I am very pleased, well actually honored, to introduce you to our speaker. I think actually most of you already know Sanjeewa quite well. Sanjeewa Liyanage, is that almost correct? Okay. Who is working as the International Program Director of International Bridges to Justice based in Geneva. And although he's now been in Geneva for many years, he is definitely no stranger to Hong Kong and to Hong Kong U, having worked here for the Asian Legal Resource Center and the Asian Human Rights Commission. And I, of course, have to highlight that he was one of our star graduates of the LLM in Human Rights program. Apparently he also graduated from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, but that's not quite as notable, I think. But Sanji has had an impressive career managing human rights and rule of law programs for over 25 years all around the world, and also conducting training for lawyers and justice officials in numerous countries. So I'm very happy he's here today to share his experience and knowledge, and in particular on the role of the defense lawyer in the prevention of investigative torture. So please join me in welcoming Sanjeewa back to Hong Kong.
Thank you very much. I feel like among close friends, so not so formal. Can you all hear me?
There's also there's a microphone. There is a microphone.
Will you prefer me to use?
Yes, please. I'm a bit old.
Yeah, I think because I don't have much loud voice, so it's better. First of all, thank you, Kelly, and it's good to be back at Hong Kong U, and also among friends and you all who came here. It's a small gathering. I heard the exam period, and so Kelly told me we don't expect too many students to show up. The topic relating to the work I do at the International Bridges to Justice. I'll talk a little bit about the work and of the organization I work for later. But often when you hear the word of a defense lawyer, you think of, many people think of the word criminal. And in fact, we talk about criminal defense lawyers. So often when I go to talk or introduce my organization to people, they ask, also your organization helping different criminals. And that's a perception issue that defense lawyers are considered as defending criminals. I often have to correct that notion, saying until proven guilty or not guilty by a court of law, the person is an accused person and presumed innocent. But public perception is very different. For example, if you see on the street someone being arrested by a police officer, there's a natural kind of naturally, people think that this person may have done something wrong. And during my work for the last 13 years at DIHR, I've come to realize that this is not the reality. And in fact, most people, in most places that developing countries, you find problems in the criminal justice system itself, that the role of a defense lawyer becomes very, very important, particularly when the primary investigation tool used by the police is torture. So I don't know whether you're familiar with, this is a movie in South Korea. I watched with a group of friends in somewhere in south of South Korea in 2012 or so. Yeah. And the movie is about wrongfully accused person. The the boy, so one is a lawyer, one is the accused person, and if you haven't seen, have you seen this one? It's called New Trial or a Retrial, and actually it's a story of something really happened in South Korea in the year 2001 or around that period, of a young boy who was arrested at a crime scene and severely tortured in a hotel room. And this is after South Korea became a democracy. I don't know, Emily, you remember, there was a time, there's a young democratic leaders gathering during Kim Dae-jung period. You and I were at one of the events. You may not remember. We went to the president's house and they hosted us for a small gathering with Kim Dae-jung, later Kim Dae-jung. But I was thinking, South Korea became a democracy in 1996, but this happened in the year 2000, 2001. So the countries become democratic, but the systems don't necessarily change with that pace of political changes. So when I watched this movie, I just realized it's very related to the work I do, and that's a defense lawyer trying to uncover the real story of this young man and prove his innocence. And then later I was looking, and then I found the actual defense lawyer as him in the movie. His name is Park Jung-young, and he's dedicated his life for finding people wrongfully convicted and defending them. And last year I was invited to speak in Seoul. Quite coincidentally, I happened to meet him, and we were speakers at one event. We were the two speakers. I didn't know it was him. So it was such a nice coincidence for me to meet with him. And then he brought with him this man. He's a blind person who was accused of murdering someone, and he was severely tortured to get a confession out of him. This is in South Korea, and he was convicted for 25 years, and he spent that 25-year sentence. He came out and now trying to clear his name. The lawyer is explaining how, he was a blind person and he was blindfolded. I don't know why they had to blindfold a blind first person, and he was tied up and hung on a beam. But this is one of the cases from the more developed democracies. In Asia, we consider South Korea as a vibrant democracy, but it's been happening, and I learned there are hundreds of wrongfully convicted people in South Korean prisons. And this lawyer is working. He actually sold almost his private properties to fight these cases because he can't find money. He went bankrupt, and he started doing crowdsourcing to fund some of his work. So the legal prohibition is not enough. This is because we counted, like, out of 93 of 103 developing countries that practice torture. But you see, the laws in these countries outlaw criminalizing torture, but practice goes on. That's a big question, why there are laws, but police are able to act. Now, I don't think it's relevant so much to Hong Kong, but there are a lot of concerns about Hong Kong too recently. We know the case of publicly police beating up people, like Kim Chang's case during the umbrella movement. But I'm going to talk more about investigative torture. So that was quite alarming for us to learn that many countries have laws but not implemented. And what we see is torture happens mostly in police stations. Sometimes police take people to private places, so like hotel rooms, like the case of South Korean young man, but mostly in police stations. And what we come to know is that torture is a very commonly used criminal investigation method, very commonly used, even now. And sometimes the only method police know in many countries is torture. They don't know any other method. So it's very widespread and commonly used. And victims are often the vulnerable population, the poor. People have no connection to the politicians, because in many of these developing countries, if you are connected to a politician, you can get away, or you can get a relief. In rural areas, marginalized populations, illiterate. So it's not, the work I do are more related to the more vulnerable populations and the majority of population in the country than the political activists or what we call human rights activists, you know. But what we see is that often there is a better response for human rights activists and political activists, because there are sometimes best lawyers volunteer to help them. But when we look at the 95% of the cases in many of these countries, in Africa, Asia, Latin America, even in a country like Turkey, you see ordinary people are subjected to torture in day-to-day criminal investigation. So it's a bigger problem than we think. And what happened next is, like, you get a confession, you just, whether the person has done something right or wrong. If you get a confession, you put the person in detention. You charge the person and put the person in detention. So these are some statistics, you know. Out of 10 million global prison population, we know 3 million people are waiting for trial. And some people have been waiting for trial for a very long time. I've come across people who've been waiting for trial for 10 years. 10 years, yes. And so the detention facilities looks like this. This is a prison in Congo I have been to. And these are the conditions of prisons or detention facilities. These are the, and not just the sanitary concerns, but also the security concerns. Every inmate, you can see, carrying a piece of metal in hand to protect themselves from a fight from another group. So it's very dangerous, you know, and many people who are here are unconvicted people. They're not convicted. It's a group of young people in a separate section. But also sometimes when you ask them why you are here, they don't even know why they're here. Somebody picked them up and put them there. So pretrial detention statistics are quite alarming in some countries. It means like Liberia and Bolivia, like 83% people in prisons are pretrial detainees and can be there for a long period of time. And in neighboring, or in Asia, in India, we know that 4 persons die in police or judicial custody every day. And we know more people die in police custody than prisons. Again, India is a country the police use torture as a routinely used as an investigation method. And also cost of pretrial detention is alarming, and I came across some of these stats, like 9 billion taxpayer uses in the USA for pretrial detention. These are more developed country statistics. So in the poorer countries, it can be even more burdensome to keep people in detention. And there's an economic cost for that. People can't go back to their jobs. Government have to take care of them, and there are a lot of other, a chain of effects that can happen. Most often pretrial detainees are men, the breadwinners in most of these countries, and the women have to take care of the men in detention, children drops out of school, and there's like the whole cycle. So in this context is what I want to talk to you about, the role of a defense lawyer. is very important. And many countries have legal aid system. Hong Kong has a legal aid system. But the key words here to use is competent, committed. Competence is in not just the law itself, but how skillful the lawyer is to perform his or her duty to provide proper defense to the person they're defending. Commitment to the cause of the rule of law, commitment to the cause of criminal justice. And often in countries where there are legal aid systems, we see lawyers go and do legal aid cases just because they have to do one or two to fulfill their quota or requirement, not out of pure commitment to the cause. And what we see is that earlier the lawyer accesses the person in police detention, you can prevent a chain of violations in the hand of police. Even in more developed places, I've been to many police stations when I was in Hong Kong to help migrants who get detained. I see, even the Hong Kong police, the way they talk to the accused, they start with a foul language word and end with a foul language word, every sentence. So I know that they don't physically probably torture. I don't know whether there are cases, maybe law, you may know about cases like that. But I know the language used inside the police stations is very terrible. And if they catch a hawker, like a Hong Kong person, the language used is very bad. Every sentence, you know what I mean, the kind of word phrases that they use. So very often, even in Hong Kong police station, they're under the interview table, there's a book hanging. That book has a list of all the lawyers available that you can call. But people not necessarily understand the importance of what a lawyer can make at this stage. So people often waive that. And there's an opportunity for them to call, but they not necessarily do that. So people's knowledge of rights is very important here too, and what the lawyer can do. And people always think lawyers are very expensive. Lawyers, it may cost a lot of burden on them to call a lawyer. So they say, okay, I don't need a lawyer, I will go to the interview. So earlier the access is very important, that can prevent a chain of violations. So the methodology that we use is, we do a lot of capacity building of lawyers, not just about the law itself, but more about skills. How do you interact with police officers? How do you interview your clients to make sure that you get the story right? Investigation methods, how do you do proper defense, etc. This is a training we did in Myanmar, in Burma, in 2017. We trained over like 140 lawyers from around the world, around the country. The other method we use is training defense lawyers itself is not sufficient if the law enforcement officers and other justice sector actors are not aligned with that, to support or allow lawyers to do their work. So they can prevent. When we first trained the first group of lawyers in China in around year 2002-03 period, the lawyers were very happy. They were taught how to properly investigate and defend. 6 months later, we went and talked to the same lawyers and asked, like, so how did you use the skills you learned from the training? Nobody talked. And then we talked privately and said, one of our lawyers tried to do their job according to Chinese law, but was put in jail for contempt of court. And the lawyer's job was not to defend, but to mitigate after sentence was done. Right? It has changed a lot since 2003 in China. There are a lot of lawyers can do much more, play a lot more important and active role in China than that period. So we try to bring together justice officials, police, prison officials, judges, prosecutors, and lawyers, and to align them with the work of lawyers and explain why these lawyers' work is important inside and outside the courtroom, and educate, sometimes in the process educating them about their own law, and they don't know very often. Advisement of rights. Educating the public about their legal rights. Now, like in Hong Kong, I remember in Hong Kong Human Rights Monitor published Know Your Rights pamphlets a long time ago, advising people about the rights. That's so important. People know if you are arrested, if you are taken into custody, what are your rights, what you can do, who you can call. So we try to also involve sometimes the police officers. This is in 2011 in China. It's important involving them to do some of the rights awareness themselves. They get educated, and people start asking questions from them about what police can do, police cannot do. So we're not only using police officers for rights awareness. We use law students, we use volunteers, NGOs to do that, but this is one example. And then legal representation itself, encouraging lawyers, particularly the younger lawyers, to give their time pro bono if possible, and also if they have a legal aid system, be part of that to provide defense, particularly for the poor and the vulnerable. So so far we've trained over like 30,000 lawyers worldwide. We provided legal representation to about 220,000. We have educated over 25 million, and we have 11 country programs, and we have outreach for another 48 countries. We do a lot of e-learning and resources for lawyers, particularly in developing countries. That's done. We do that free of charge, available on the internet. So the early access to legal representation is very critical, ensuring due process, often before abuses happen. And lawyers can make a difference if they are able to access the accused at an early stage. Even small interventions, when they happen early, can substantially reduce the abuse. Sometimes lawyer can point out that there's no such, there are no grounds at all to arrest, and there were situations that people were just released from the station at that point. Also build systematic access. It's not just one place, but every place possible. So the bottom-up support from lawyers is very important, but the top-down cooperation with the authorities to complement that. And so this is a group of such lawyers. These are lawyers in a very tiny, very not so well-known country called Burundi, next to Rwanda. Everyone knows about Rwanda. This group of lawyers work, very committed group of lawyers, and what they do, in fact, is on Tuesdays and Thursdays, they go to visit police stations on their own. And they have an agreement with the police. They come and they want to visit every person in the holding cell and see how many of them have lawyers. If not, they try to make an intervention and provide them the legal representation. That has actually released hundreds of people at the police station level. And so small group of people are doing that work. And they're not kind of people who are very, you can see they're not that sophisticated. They know the law and they learn some basic skills and they apply that. They're not very rich, like many lawyers in many developed countries, but they do quite important role when there's no legal aid system in the country too. There's another lawyer working for us in Myanmar, and then I took this picture going behind because she was guiding us to the courtroom, but this is how she went there. And this is in the capital, Naypyidaw, where all the government offices are But we realized even in that big city that Burmese government built in the middle of nowhere, there was no lawyers to help people who get arrested. So we opened a small office, and that's where people can come and consult. So that's a very brief explanation of the topic itself, the importance of the role of lawyers, and also the work that I do. I know that I have a very experienced group of colleagues here. You may have some of your views and questions. And I'm very happy to discuss here if you have questions or if you have comments. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sanjeev. We have plenty of time for discussions, questions. I know I have several of my own, but I'll open it up to the floor first.
When it comes to torture, there is physical torture and psychological and mental torture. So do you make a distinction either way? Other types of tortures?
When we train the lawyers for defense, we train them on both. Psychological torture is used, it's more used in more developed countries. We can say straightforward physical torture is used in more developing countries. It is quite, once again, the people's knowledge about that this is a kind of a psychological torture is very, very important. One very common way of psychological torture is to threaten a family member, say that I know you are now being detained, but I know where your daughter is going to school, and I know what time she's coming out of the house. So like that kind of tactics to use there. But very often the systems are developed to, now UN and doctors have developed, psychiatrists have developed Istanbul protocol to help document physical torture, but in terms of psychological torture, not so much advanced in that area. But we ask lawyers to be very mindful of any such experience which we have gone through.
Hi, Sanjeev. I first met you in Geneva, when I went there on my various trips to attend hearing of UN treaty bodies. And one of them, of course, is the Committee of Torture. So can you speak a little bit about how some of the countries, they all sign up to the treaty, and they also attend these hearings to submit their report for scrutiny of the committee. Do you think these UN hearings help?
That's a good question.
I think so, because this is the only forum where we can go internationally, and that treaty is a very important convention against torture. And we call torture the mother of all human rights violations. So it's a kind of a very important treaty, although you have CCPL and others, but the torture is a very important treaty. And I think it is still very important to go there and engage. The only thing is the dynamics sometimes is not so sincere. Many governments go there to defend their record of torture than to see progressively how they can work together with the civil society to find a way to eliminate it or prevent it. And so you often see kind of contentious atmosphere there. The NGOs come and present the actual real situation, and governments try to play it down. So that doesn't help much. I don't know whether UN can be a little bit more, the committee itself can be a little bit more, have a more better dynamics to be more get the governments to more engage in try to make changes. They do, and then the powers of these committees are quite limited, and they can make recommendations, right? Kelly knows this.
It's to share
recommendations, but there's no binding nature. So, but it's a forum. It's an important international forum to go and engage and use that forum. And I know that when you go there, you also do side events, try to do press conferences, let the world know. Even in a place like Hong Kong, this is a concern. And, last time we talked about torture used during the umbrella movement, arrests and so on. But I think it's very important not to be complacent. Sometimes you see we have a good system and it's running very well, so we can relax. That's what happened. I'm from Sri Lanka. That's what happened on the 21st of April in Sri Lanka. We were very relaxed about the security after the end of the war. Never knew this was coming. So this is a completely different experience. But in the justice system too, vigilance is so important and not. I remember Kofi Annan at a forum once told in Geneva that genocides happen with killing of one person. At the earliest stage, if you can try to prevent such killing, you can prevent a genocide. But if you're just complacent and you say, okay, it's not that important, and then it can, have, and then go out of control. That's what happened in Rwanda. And similarly, in our justice systems, I know the Hong Kong civil society is very vigilant, even though in a very difficult situation now, but I think to make sure everything that we build to make this city a city by rule of law is maintained and don't let slide backward. Because once you slide backwards, it's so difficult to get back normal. I explain this police torture. I explain this way that it's, as human beings, it's very easy to get used to bad habits, but it's very difficult to correct them. Go back, try to get rid of the bad habits. People talk about smoking or drinking, it's so easy to get, but if you become an alcoholic, it's so difficult to get back. It's like a much more difficult process. The same for the police. It's very easy for them to use torture, and it's a very easy bad habit. But to get rid of it takes much more effort.
Well, we have observed more allegations of maltreatment in immigration detention facilities or other immigration operations than police recently. In the police, development is that it seems that they use maltreatment and beating of people, may not amount to torture, as a means of punishing these people who are powerful in their eyes. We do not find those torture so serious in Hong Kong in the investigation process, probably because there have been quite a lot of measures put in place. Even though we seldom have publicly funded, but we don't really have publicly funded police station visits for lawyers. So if there are lawyers in the police station, either they have done because people afford to pay that, or because people do it pro bono. I want to ask whether you observe this kind of distinction between police and immigration operations, in which I think immigration usually expected better than most parts of the world. I'm not sure. So, what's your experience? You see that they are worse as compared to the police now?
Yes, I think particularly in the current context of a lot of this issue of migration. People there's whole in Europe too. You find a lot of detention facilities, immigration detention facilities. I think as far as the law goes, it applies to it too. But I think there are a lot of people crowded in these places, and if they are not really able to cope with the situation, they can be. I think I'm learning this from you. That's happening here. Even I heard myself in Hong Kong customs. They arrest persons too. I've seen using quite coercive methods, something you call it. Sometimes I remember there was one case. They arrest a person. The person is able to organize crime, like a big triad or something. And then, because of that, the police didn't want to investigate further. This is in Hong Kong, and they would say, like, you know what? If you plead guilty to this charge, you can go home. These are all migrant people in Hong Kong. You can go home. If you don't plead guilty, you can be detained for 6 months or 8 months for the trial. So the people just plead guilty because they want to go home, right? But the real reason is if they plead not guilty, they have to investigate, and then the triads are involved, and they have to go a little bit more deeper. They want to avoid that, so they try to do shortcuts. But immigration facilities are a concern, and they include that. And the other problem is that most of the time these people in immigration facilities are more vulnerable because they are not the locals. They may not speak the language. There may be language issues, cultural issues, and that all be more factors there. You have seen even in the US immigration facilities, children are put in like cage-like places, and one child died, right? Hydration, a young child, and so it is becoming a very big concern as well.
Okay, Alice. Oh, did you have any?
Of the 10 million people who are currently under arrest, how many would you define are considered terrorists by their countries?
I would say very few. These are like normal. You know what terrorism? Right? Terrorists.
Yeah, were a enemy combatant in the Civil War. Most of them are civil.
No, these prison populations. Go back to. Where my slide is. Anyway, these are statistics from Penal Reforms International. This is just the global statistic for all prisons, I don't know about terrorism related, but I would say very. I can talk about my own country. There are people detained in Sri Lanka for using a special legislation called Prevention of Terrorism Act. And the number of people who are detained are relatively small, but the problem is these kind of persons can be detained for a very long period of time without trial. That's a concern. Some people who've been detained under terrorism laws, it's not the number, but it's the length and their rights. Being there in Sri Lanka itself at 15 years, 20 years being kept without trial. And that's the danger of trying to enact special laws, even national security legislation kind of thing, that you try to subdue the due process in the situation under the pretext of threats to the nation, and abuse can be, you can see a lot of people politicians abuse that kind of laws too. So I can't give you actual statistics to answer, but I know that relatively very few. But it's the conditions and the length that's more important than the number. Their rights are much more restricted.
So most of these people are doing economic crimes.
I would say so. Most are petty theft, accused of petty theft, or I don't know, maybe assault or small crimes. And I really like to do if there's some institution like do a research about actual prison population in developing countries. I have a feeling that closer to 50% of the people are innocent. I just have a feeling because. Even in the very sophisticated systems like in the US, you can convict people and wrongfully execute in a perfect, near perfect system. And imagine a system that doesn't work at all in these countries. So I have a feeling that a lot of innocent people are just locked up.
Thanks, Sanjeewa. Perhaps to tie in with the gentleman's question, just on that, in some of the preparatory work that we are doing for Cambodia, as an example, and Cambodia obviously not being defined, I think, as a developed country, its prison population, a Human Rights Council report from 2018, from last year, the exact numbers, the prison population, pre-trial detention, prison population is around about 26,800. Or I beg your pardon, of about which a third, about 7,100, 7,200. So the total, you have the total prison population, of which only 7,100 or 7,200 are convicted or have been convicted. The rest are pre-trial detainees, and then specifically not for terrorist-related acts or terrorist-related crimes, which would then form sort of the normal, if I could call it run-of-the-mill charges or indictments: assault, financial crimes, violent crimes, economic crimes, white and blue-collar crimes, things like that. But specifically in Cambodia, that prison population, and then related to non-terrorist activities. So it's a staggering amount of pre-trial detainees for often petty theft, petty economic crimes, not even related to what one would consider more serious crimes. Just a side comment.
So could I say they're mainly there for economic reasons? I mean, we got private corporations in America who run prisons.
Yes.
And they depend on their good prisoners. So could I say this is the same in developing countries as well?
I would say it's in the US is very, very unique. I saw the documentary film called 13. Have you seen this? It's
no.
called 13. It's really good. It's about the private companies running prisons and want to keep people locked up. Because I think one of the largest prison populations in the US, comparatively. But in these poorer nations, more it's government run, it's not private companies running it, and very badly run and badly resourced, and the conditions are kind of the photos that I show you, the kind of conditions over there. But what I want to tell you is sort of about building the global attention to build or rebuild justice systems is another big topic related to this. You see a lot of global attention to transitional justice in post-conflict countries. A very good example is Cambodia. You had Khmer Rouge, and there was a cry for trying the people who have done terrible things during the Khmer Rouge. And there's a special tribunal that was set up in Phnom Penh. And I don't know how long it took, but I know the amount of money spent is over $300 million to try about 5 people. And one of them died during the trial, and they were very old. I have no issue with transitional justice. Actually, I was talking to Pablo de Grief, who is Special Rapporteur, or the former Special Rapporteur of Transitional Justice. I was talking about what about day-to-day justice in post-conflict countries? Because you're trying to prosecute people for committing horrific crimes, but while the international community spent $300 million, they spent less than $1 million a year for the whole justice system in Cambodia. And that they are in appalling conditions. The judges are not very well trained. So while the Khmer Rouge tribunal is trying 5 persons, the people were tortured in police stations day to day in Cambodia. And so this is another part of it. It's very important when you talk about transitional justice, not just looking back, but also looking forward to rebuild the systems. And also once a very carefully rebuilt systems like in Hong Kong not to let slide back. That's so important, keep the resistance not, because it was very, we know the whole thing about bill established by CICC in 1973, so, and that was due to the public pressure, right, on people going to streets against police corruption. I think you all know the story about this British police officer who absconded with a lot of money, and that created the whole movement. But then it created a system change. And that system change evolved to become stronger and better, but then as I hear and see, there are threats to that system. And that's so important, because we always talk about Hong Kong, it's a place, Hong Kong's success is due to the fact it's a place, very special place based on the rule of law. And that rule of law is so important. And the lawyer's role in that rule of law is even more important.
I want to ask about Myanmar.
Yeah.
I've been there twice, and you were training the judges, the lawyers there. Did the question of the Rohingyas come up? Do they use it?
We were not allowed to go there, Emily, actually. So we selected another 4 provinces, also minorities, and have conflicts there too. But no organization is allowed to go to Rakhine State in Myanmar. But we try to see, we try to engage with the Minister of Justice or the Attorney General, and to just to prove that benefits of organizations like us to, in general, development of criminal justice system. So we hope we will be able to help, but right now it's very tightly controlled area. And, even the UN Special Rapporteur was not allowed to go in.
I feel like because of that, many people are not going into it. I feel like it's a discussion in many NGOs and human rights groups right now. Do we get involved with Myanmar in some way so that we're not just not being involved? Or do we stay not involved because we don't want to have connections with government? How is that struggle? Do you guys have that struggle? How is that playing out?
We have that problem in every country almost. So, we started our program in Zimbabwe when Zimbabwe was under Mugabe. I went there in 2006 and met with the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, a very vibrant group that was defending political activists. And when I talked to them, I was like, do you think an organization like us is useful in this situation, because it is a dictatorship? And then they told us, like, you know what, we are a small organization, a small organization can defend political activists. But there are ordinary people being tortured around the country, and 95% of victims of torture are ordinary, and we can't handle that. So please come and help. And then we went there and we talked to the Minister of Justice. We trained the first criminal defense training we did with the legal aid lawyers in Zimbabwe. And actually what the result of that was decongestion of prisons. There were a lot of people locked up. Actually, there was a terrible situation in Zimbabwe at that time. There was a cholera outbreak in the country, and the prisoners were locked up. Detainees, not just prisoners. and they were given one meal every 4 days, and people were shouting and dying of hunger inside. And then we managed to get lawyers to go there and find out these people were detained, unconvicted people, get them released, a lot of them released and went back to their families. But we did that in collaboration with prison authorities, so it's not a political, it's just to help him to relieve the system. But to answer your question, for us, we look at more long-term development of the criminal justice system, and in that process, it's very important to get government buy-in in that process. We don't condemn or we don't comment the government, but rather we like to play a very technical role there. In Myanmar, so far it's been okay, but we know that people and in organizations have their own positions on not to engage. But we don't engage with the government. We rather like to engage with the justice officials, try to change the mindsets, try to create more understanding. Even I met with some very, very senior police officials in Myanmar, and not everybody thinks the same way. Sometimes they can't express their own feeling publicly, but privately they say, I don't agree with everything going on in my country, I want to see some change, and so please come and help.
What about China? I have to declare, I'm on the board of directors of the China Human Rights Lawyers Concern Group.
Yeah. In terms of China has gone a long way, and we know that Supreme Court of China released some statistics in 2015, said that around 15% of cases were resolved at an early stage. This is mainly because of involvement of defense lawyers at an early stage. This is not the case. In China, defense lawyers were appointed traditionally at the time of trial, or right before the trial, that they didn't even have time to prepare for the case. But I think one thing, but we know it's challenging because we know hundreds of lawyers were put in prison. Some disappeared. We don't know where they are, but there are, we've trained close to 19,000 lawyers in China, but they are more, not very high profile ones, normal, ordinary lawyers in rural areas. We know that the ability for lawyers to do more to provide protection to Chinese individuals has increased, and they are doing a lot of work, but it doesn't sometimes get reported on mainstream media because they are not very famous cases. But that ability is there, and the lawyers are more sophisticated. They have a lot of chat groups. They communicate among themselves, support groups. So I also think lawyers are a very important group in terms of hope in China, in the legal development of China. Because the lawyers' role is so important. They are the one in between the people and the legal system, and supporting them. So we want to continue to support lawyers in China, human rights lawyers in China as well.
Actually, two questions. I think my second question might be a good way to close also. The first question is, and you suggested that a good part of the solution is training lawyers, getting lawyers engaged with the police and other officials, also visiting lawyers, visiting prisons and that kind of thing. But how would you, what do you think would work to reduce the incentives in the first place for police officers to actually try to extract confessions? In what they think is a sort of easier, efficient manner, I suppose. I mean, are there methods that you've seen that have been successful in reducing those incentives, along with all of the other measures that need to be taken? The second question is, I wonder if you could share with us one of your most inspiring success stories, because we've been talking about a lot of problems, but it would be, I know that you share, you've alluded to a number of success stories, but I just would be curious to know what you think has been the most inspiring.
I think about it. About the first question, incentive. We tell often the police that if you torture people, you look bad, and right? I mean, you look bad in the public. Public lose confidence in you. You want to be like that. in our roundtable, even we often ask that question: do you want to look good to the public and public trust you and public treat you respectfully, or if you want to look otherwise? There was this story somebody told me. In normal circumstances, if a criminal or a thief come to you, you run away. In many of these countries, when the police come, people run away because they're so afraid of the police and they're worried that they get ill-treated. That's a kind of an image of the police. So the incentive for them is to look good, and even when you talk to the government and say, like, would you like to see a better police force, and would you like to see torture reduced? Would you like to see better image internationally? Would you like to report less torture cases as a committee against torture, and show a real improvement? And this is an opportunity. This is a win-win situation, actually. Not torturing can reduce pretrial detention. Not torturing, there's an economic incentive, governments and the system as well. So that's the way to explain an engagement and assisting a situation like that. But at the end, everyone benefits and everyone look good. And people, rights get protected, more importantly. For success stories,
It's difficult.
it's funny because I know a lot of stories, but I'm trying to think of a good one. It's not a good one. Jacques, do you remember any such stories? No? Jacques is my colleague, Well, I can, but I can tell you a success story, but also some kind of an interesting change that happened during that. This was in Zimbabwe. So a group of lawyers found out these 26 detainees locked up, given one meal every 4 days, dying of hunger and disease, and they were all, and even the authorities had lost their files, and they did not know why they were keeping them. And then they managed to talk to the judge and bring them to the court. It took them about 4 days to get the procedure to bring them. Within the 4 days, 4 people died. So it's not a success story, but it's just a tragic situation that when the lawyers went to take them to court, 4 of them had already died, so there were 22 of them. They brought them, and the reason they were held because they could not pay bail money. And the bail was about $5 US dollars. That was the bail for each person. Even they didn't have $5 of bail money, They're so poor. And then at that moment, the lawyers talked to the judge saying, do you want to send these people back to die, or would you like to release them? And then the judge was in a very difficult situation because you have to charge bail to release them, and there's no money to pay. And the judge said something quite contradictory legally, but he said, I'm releasing you on free bail. Yeah, concept. So this created precedents in Zimbabwe. Now lawyers always go to the judges and say, if a poor person cannot pay bail. There was this case that the judge released on free bail, and the free bail has become a more commonly used for the poor people, so that they can be released. Particularly, ridiculously small amount of money, even they can for us, but for them they cannot.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's inspiring. That's okay. Thank you very much, Sanjeewa. It's an incredibly informative and really important discussion. Please join me in thanking.
All of these things exist to show the population that if you get over the line, you'll end up in this horrible place.
That's also true.
So you won't
Yes,
rob
yeah,
or steal.
we do that too. We do that too. Actually, we do that in schools, young people.